What an extraordinary couple of weeks in our Catholic Church, with the Pope dying the day after Easter, the biggest and most important day of the whole year for us. And then a new Pope selected just before the fourth Sunday of Easter and the celebration of Good Shepherd Sunday. And he certainly didn't, I don't think, had any inclination that he was going to be elected. I don't think he was on any list. But here he is now, the shepherd of the whole church. And his vocation has expanded rapidly and hugely. And we celebrate Mother's Day, and that is a special day. And if you're Mexican or Mexican-American, you got 2 days in a row, so you're very lucky, you know. So I told the Filipinos last night they should be honorary Mexicans so that they could celebrate 2 Mother's Day too, but I don't know if anybody listened to me. So here we are, celebrating Good Shepherd Sunday, and the church asks us to pray for vocations to the priesthood. And the reason is, it's not because priesthood is higher or better, even though people talk like that sometimes, but it's because we need priests to make Eucharist happen. And our numbers keep dwindling, and that should be of great concern to us all. We should be doing all we can to encourage vocations of the priesthood. And in a moment, I'm going to share my own story about it, as I think it also relates to the scriptures today. In the first reading from the Acts of the Apostles, this is a turning moment. The Jewish Sanhedrin, the leaders, were after the apostles and the disciples of Jesus for preaching about Jesus because crowds were coming. Crowds were coming, and they were jealous, and they were angry. And they once again told them, stop preaching about this Jesus. And then Paul and Barnabas do the classic get in your face. Or I lived in South Central for 12 years, and it was get out of my face. But get in your face is to confront. And Paul and Barnabas turned on those leaders who were telling them to stop preaching and said, you were talking to us? You who killed him? You put him on a tree and killed him? You've rejected the message. So let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to turn away from you and give the message now to the Gentiles. This was remarkable. And the church began to grow rapidly after this movement toward the Gentiles. In the second reading, we have the apocalyptic literature. And I don't know if you know this, but this book and all the apocalyptic literature in the Bible is talking about the end times. And it's usually in coded language, but especially the book of Revelation. There's all kinds of things said in this that Christians would understand, but followers, those who were not followers of Jesus wouldn't get it. So, for example, there's one line that I find so amazing. It says, then one of the elders said to me, these are the ones who have survived the time of great distress. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. What is that about? Made their robes white in the blood, red, of the Lamb. Of course, the Lamb is, we're talking about Jesus on the cross pouring out his blood. And the white robes are the white robes of baptism. And this is what we put on, the white garment. And that shows the cleansing from sin and this new life of grace that floods us. And so this is, again, encouragement to the early church that was beginning to be persecuted, and to say, don't worry about it. God will take care of you, and we're going to lead you to springs of life-giving water and wipe away every tear from your eyes. Quite a great encouragement to the early church. But it's this gospel that speaks specifically as Jesus a shepherd. And he says, my sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. That's our call as Christians, to follow the voice of Jesus our Lord. So let me tell you how it happened to me, since we're celebrating Vocation Sunday, World Day of Prayer for Vocations. The first time I thought of being a priest, I was in 4th grade, but it was very brief. It lasted a week. And then the next week I wanted to be a firefighter. I don't know why. And then the next week after that, an astronaut, and then I forget. The list was... It just went up and down, crazy stuff. But when I was in 6th grade at the end of the year, we were coming back from Bakersfield. My dad and my mom and myself, we'd been up to visit my sister. And we stopped at the San Fernando Cemetery, the Catholic cemetery, because my parents wanted to visit the grave of a friend who had just recently died. So we stopped, and we're at the graveside, and I'm looking around, a little punk kid, and I see the mission on my right, and then in front of me I see the minor seminary, the high school seminary where a boy went to study to be a priest. And I didn't know what it was. So I just asked my dad and mom, what's that building over there? It was the dormitories of the seminary. And my dad said, oh, that's where a young boy goes to study to be a priest. And out of nowhere in my head, this voice, not an actual voice, but I just said, I'm going to go there. I'm going to be a priest. I don't know where it came from. And my parents weren't telling me you should go or pushing me. They just said that's where you go to study to be a priest. So the next year, the Sarah Club, which used to be real big in Los Angeles, would take busloads of 7th and 8th graders out to the seminary to visit it. So I went. And then the next year, I took the test. I told my dad and mom I wanted to be a student at the seminary, maybe become a priest. And they never pushed me in either direction. They didn't tell me that I should do it. They didn't tell me that I shouldn't, because there are some parents who say, I don't want my son to be a priest. I want him to get married and have kids. I want to be a grandparent. But there are some mothers, usually, sorry on Mother's Day, but it has to be said, I never heard of a father doing it, but some mothers who would push their sons to be priests. And I think the mother had the vocation, not the boy. And in some cases, rare, there's one in particular I remember. This son is driving me crazy. One in particular I remember, there were two brothers who went to the seminary, and the mother was very pleased until one of them left. They both left eventually. But when the first one left, she didn't speak to him for a year. Oh my God, that was the mother's vocation. And she got over it, but it took a long time. Well, my parents said, if you go, fine. If you leave, fine. It's all up to you. And I really, really appreciated that from my parents, that they didn't push me in either way and left it up to me. So when I went into the seminary, there was what we called the west side and the east side. The west side was the old seminary that had been there for 30 years or more, and they built a new side called the east side because it was the baby boom years, the 50s, and there are lots of kids out there. So they built another side that doubled the size of the seminary, and my class was the first one to go there and the largest class that ever entered, but also the most that left. There were 175 of us when I entered the seminary, and 75 graduated. And half of that group left and didn't go to the college seminary, and then another half of the class came in then. But when we eventually got ordained, only 12 from our class were ordained, and all the rest had left. So I said to myself, first of all, how I ever heard the call, I don't know. I just knew that that's what I thought I wanted. But the more amazing thing is why I stayed. Because it was a 12-year program, high school, college, and graduate school. And vast numbers were leaving, and some were very good friends. People that I thought were so much more intelligent, so much more talented, that they would make outstanding priests. Why are they leaving? Why are they leaving? And I'm staying. And somehow the call that worked in me was just encouraging me to hang in there. There were 4 other guys in my class from St. Charles Borromeo School. They left either in high school or college. So out of the 5 of us, I was the only one that remained. Well, the reason I mention this is, of course, we should pray for all vocations. There's vocations to priesthood and diaconate, religious life, to married life, to single life. And all of those vocations are important and I think equal. I don't think a priest is higher, although we talk about that like that sometimes. The Filipinos come up to me and they do this, and the Latinos come up and they kiss my hand. I always kiss their hand right back. If you kiss my hand or put my hand to your forehead, I'm going to do the same thing to you. Because I don't want people to walk away thinking, oh, the priest is up here and we're down here. That's rubbish. And besides, personally, I think married life is much more difficult than mine. I said this at the wedding yesterday, I think. But, you know, I'll tell you, I've met a lot of couples that when I left their company, I said, thank God we priests can't marry, if that's what it comes to. but it is a difficult life. There's so much responsibility. There's so much pressure. People have to make a living, and if they have kids, they've got another huge responsibility. And sometimes there are people that it takes 10 hours of their day to go to work, stay at work, and come back from work, and they finally get home exhausted, and the last thing they want to do is to communicate, and that's when they have to do it. That's the most important person to communicate with, the person that you love for the rest of your life. Job and all the other things in life are going to come and go, but in theory, if you're going to stay with your spouse, you got to communicate. And I'm no expert, I've never been married, but I can tell you when there's good communication in a relationship and when there isn't. And when there isn't, it's a pretty sure sign that they're going to have difficulties in their marriage. But I think the married life is beautiful, but very challenging and very demanding. But it's an amazing vocation. What strikes me, though, is, in my opinion, how few people even think like this. God, is this the person I should marry? Jesus, is this the one you are calling me to fall in love with? And it may sound weird, but, you know, if we're in sync with our God, we're connected and in sync, you would think we'd share everything and ask for God's advice. Send us your Spirit. You know, I have met a few couples that I prepared for marriage that I didn't think should have been married. But I didn't tell them. I just gave extra to them to try to challenge them because their communication was just pathetic. And several of them that left each other. But the reason I didn't tell them you shouldn't get married is because they'd hate me first, and then they'd hate the church. That church wouldn't let us get married, and then they'd leave the church and blame it on me and blame it on this amorphous church. So I would challenge them every way I could to say, do you really feel prepared? Do you want to get married at this time? And try and slow them down and whatever. But they're all good vocations. In fact, who would you think is a more important person in this vocation? The vocation to be a brain surgeon, or a plumber? And I think the answer simply depends if your sink is clogged, right? You don't need a brain surgeon, you need a good plumber. Every vocation is worthy. I knew a woman in Pasadena, she was the aunt of one of my classmates, a friend, and she had 2 children from the same man, but she never married him, and they didn't live together. And she was the most outspoken woman, Tia, of this guy, and I loved her, and she said, I want children. I don't want a man in my life, I want children. And I think there is a true vocation to motherhood. I think there are some women, too, who maybe should be mothers. They're, whatever, high-strung, or it's just too much. But in any case, I think all these vocations are so important. The priesthood vocation, you know, I think is very rewarding and very wonderful. But it, too, is demanding, especially if we're going to really preach the gospel and really try to live the gospel and be a model of that. And why we don't have women priests at this point, I know that will put some of you on edge, but be said. Why there aren't women priests, I think our church would be so much richer. And I'll tell you, that Anglican bishop, that woman that spoke to Trump at that inaugural address, I believe it was, wow. She was strong and direct and gentle at the same time. Very respectful. But she said a mouthful. So today on this Good Shepherd Sunday, we're being asked to pray for vocations. I tell you, I don't think people understand how powerful their influence or their invitations can be, especially grandparents. Grandparents to go up to a grandson and say, you know, have you ever thought of being a priest? You'd make a good priest. There's so many kids that I see in the school that are just amazing. And if they never get asked, never get invited, perhaps it doesn't enter in their mind, or they may have that mentality that says, oh, I'm not worthy, I couldn't do it. I almost left 6 years into the seminary because I'm a crybaby. And when I realized I'd have to do funerals, and I just realized, because I'd been to many as an altar server, I said, I don't think I can do it. And I was having this big conversation with God in the chapel. I said, I think I should leave. How am I going to be a leader of the community if I break down in tears at every funeral? For God's sake, this makes no sense. And suddenly, and I don't speak like this as magic. I don't believe in magic. But suddenly a peace came over me. And suddenly I just realized, well, maybe you won't cry at every funeral. And maybe you'll find strength to be a strength for others. And it got me over the hump. It got me through it. And I think the scriptures today, especially the introduction, it talks about talking to Jesus and most of all, listening, but not with this ear, the ear of the heart. And why not ask his opinion? Jesus, what do you think? Should I be a priest? Should I get married? Should I stay single? What do you think, Jesus? What should I do? What would make me most happy, make me most fulfilled, and use me to do good for the world? And I think when we pray like that, when we dare to open that conversation, amazing things can happen. And that's what I think this Sunday, Good Shepherd Sunday, is all about, to see what a good conversation with the Lord might do to us.